You're going to learn even more cool stuff about Carthage and ultimately how Muloch and his group traveled from the area of Carthage into the New World. So now that you really know more about the Phoenicians than you probably ever wanted to, let's construct a hypothesis that would account for the story in the Book of Mormon of the origin of the people of Zarahemla, or as we should now call them, Mulekites. So let's suppose you are a queen of Judah in 586 BC. After seeing your kingdom destroyed, despite the widely held belief that you had that God had promised that your royal city would never be destroyed, as clearly the Nephites believed, you conclude that you must escape before you are carried away as a slave to Babylon. So what do? Well, you know that there are other elite members of the city that are fleeing to Sidon or some other port city to take a ship west. It should be noted if you are Jewish, it is likely that your faith in Yahweh has been destroyed because it is clear he was not as powerful a god as the Babylonian ones. However, it is also likely you're not Jewish. It is indeed more likely that you're Phoenician, since the Jewish kings of Israel and Judah had a long history of taking Jewish Phoenician princesses as the wives of the very famous Jezebel, who was the wife of Ahab, and the daughter of the king of Sidon. Note the Sidon connection with the people of Zarahemla, because of course they named their river after Sidon. Interestingly enough, there was a daughter of Jezebel who worshipped Phoenician gods who married King Jehoram of Judah. So what do? You flee with others to Sidon and take a ship to be as far away as you can from the Babylonians, but to be among your own people. So where is that? Well, we can guess the answer to that question. The great city, Phoenician city of Carthage, which was at the time the greatest city in the Western Mediterranean. And that's where your son is born. So what do you name him? You name him after one of the prominent gods of Carthage. So that's a nice little hypothesis. It explains how the people who became the people of Zarahemla, a Jewish name, was founded by a guy of Jewish origin with the name of a nasty Phoenician god, and lived on the river with the same name as a prominent Phoenician city. But is there any concrete historical evidence that supports this hypothesis?
When we look at maps of the empire, we need to remember this was a vassallocracy, and that land was held to maintain a port and access to and control of the sea lanes, and not for its own sake. A very different perspective to the Romans, which was a society built around land. At its height, before the Punic Wars, Carthage was probably the biggest city in the world, a cosmopolitan, bustling metropolis of traders and artisans where anyone could rise to the greatest heights.
The answer is surprisingly yes. In addition to the Lehites and the Mulekites, which we can only know via the Book of Mormon, it happens we have substantial historical evidence of at least 4 other groups that fled Jerusalem about 586 BC and settled permanently thousands of miles away. And at least 2 of these groups fled by ship. The one we will look at today is a group of Jews who have lived in and around Carthage for 2,600 years. Their origin story is at the time of the destruction of the temple, certain priests, i.e. the sons of Aaron, they were Kohanim, fled west, bringing with them, among other items, the doors of the temple of Solomon, and found their way to the modern city of Tunisia, modern-day Tunisia, or ancient Carthage. At one time, Tunisia had in excess of 300,000 Jews and was one of the largest communities Jewish located outside the Levant. Today, there are fewer than 1,000 Jews who remain, and most of them are clustered in a single island named Djerba. I was fortunate enough to visit Tunisia in October 2025. After spending a week in Carthage, I spent a week in Djerba, exploring its connection to the Book of Mormon and visiting the Jewish community there. In order to get there, we took a ferry to the mainland, and then when we left, we drove across a causeway built by the Romans and probably the Phoenicians. While there, I was actually invited to attend Sabbath services, and did so, and participate in the ritual meal after services. It was a great, wonderful experience for me. I've attended other Jewish Sabbath services in other parts of the world, but in this case, we had about 12 men in a small room in somebody's house, and we sang Hebrew songs, and of course we worshiped the Torah and read from the Torah, And they were very, very thoughtful and very kind and very welcoming to me. We couldn't communicate very effectively because the leader asked me if I spoke Arabic, and I said no. And he said, do you speak German? I said no. He said, do you speak French? I said no. And he looked at me and kind of shook his head like, these dumb Americans. Now, in fairness, my friend and I spoke Japanese, Chinese, and Korean, but no languages that we could communicate with these guys with. But we discovered when people of goodwill can communicate effectively, even if they don't understand one another's languages. I also spent some time exploring the oldest continuously utilized synagogue in the world, the foundations of which go back to 586 BC, and which, according to local tradition, in whose foundations are buried one of the doors of Solomon's temple. You can see the structure here, and you will note the plaque, which explains the dating of the structure. Although this particular building, known as the Djerba, was built in 1878 and is currently a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the foundations go back to 586 BC. Unfortunately, it has also been the site of several terrorist attacks, one in 1985 when 3 people were killed, and another in 2002 when 21 people were killed, and again more recently when 5 people were killed. As a result, there's a very strong police presence in the entire Jewish quarter. But for our purposes, perhaps the most compelling evidence of the connection between the Djerban Jews and the Book of Mormon is scientific evidence, specifically DNA. Now, one of the most interesting things about Djerba and its population is the genetic inheritance of the population. For most of its history, the Jewish population was made up almost exclusively of people who claimed to be descendants of Jewish priests, or the Kohanim, who traced their ancestry back to Aaron, who was Moses' brother, who was the high priest, and is referred to in D&C section 13. Genetic studies of Djerban male Jews show that they are the most differentiated and distinctive Jews in all of North Africa. And the Cohen gene is passed only from father to son, and so it's patrilineal, not matrilineal. In addition, another study several years ago sampled 15 male Jews in Djerba and found that 13 of them carried the Cohen model haplotype, and is most frequently found among groups that trace their lineage to Aaron. That was a study done in 2005. The prior study was done in 2012. The rate of this haplotype in Djerba is substantially higher than any place else in the world. So what's that say? It says there's substantial scientific DNA evidence that the males in Djerba, male Jewish population of Djerba, are in fact descendants of Aaron, the brother of Moses. So assuming our hypothesis is sound, we still have one other question to ask. How did this mixed group of Jews and Phoenicians get to the Western Hemisphere? This question can be easily answered. In 2019, a replica Phoenician ship that duplicates ships built in 600 BC sailed from Carthage to the Western Hemisphere in 49 days, stopping in an ancient Phoenician port city on the Atlantic coast of Spain, Cadiz, and the Canary Islands, before finally making its landfall in the Dominican Republic and then sailing to Miami, Florida. It was known as the Phoenicia Expedition, and you can watch some video of it here.
After 39 days, they finally spotted land, on the same island of Hispaniola where Christopher Columbus made landfall in 1492. But they now knew that the Phoenicians might have arrived there long before the Genoese. To their grateful surprise, a reception was organized by the local supporters at the Dominican Republic Navy base, including a martial band.
The Phoenicians were officially in the Americas, maybe for the first time. Or maybe for the first time in thousands of years. A short sail for the modern salty Phoenician sailors, but a gigantic symbolic archaeological step. They arrive in the state of Florida on February the 4th, 2020, to a hero's reception at the Coral Ridge Yacht Club in Fort Lauderdale.
They had proved that ancient people, the Phoenicians, had the technology to arrive in the Americas, almost 3,000 years before the European explorers.
After an excellent week staying at Coral Ridge to recover, they moved for another celebration in Miami.
So, in summary, we discovered that an error that has been existent in the Book of Mormon, the LDS version of the Book of Mormon, since 1830, when it's corrected, enlightens us dramatically about the group of people we call the people of Zarahemla, and shows a direct connection to the Phoenicians and more especially to Carthage, and also explains how they got from Carthage to America, and the fact that the Jewish population of Djerba claims descendants from the kings, from the priests of the temple, who escaped at the same time that Muloch or Moloch would have escaped, I think adds substantial credence to the entire story. So we've traveled with Muloch all the way to somewhere in the Americas, and I hope you've enjoyed the journey and didn't get too seasick. But you've learned something important, and you can always use this in the gospel doctrine class. Whenever they talk about Muloch, well, you can correct them now because that's not what the Book of Mormon actually says, because we value data over dogma. Thanks.